Hello and welcome to this short video where I'm just going to talk through your current minor assignment, the audio-visual response to Chinua Achebe's essay and Edward Said's essay about the novel Heart of Darkness. As you already know, in some ways this builds on the discussion forum that you just completed last week, which we also used Flipgrid for, so you're already in the rhythm of talking about these texts, and you're in the rhythm of talking about them to a camera. So in some ways this is just a very logical development of what we've been doing in that discussion forum, and that's very much by design. So you shouldn't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel in this assignment. It's very much using the discussion forum as a chance to prepare for this. However, I would say that there is probably a need in a lot of cases for people to maybe take on board the discussion that you've had, but also to take the opportunity to refine your ideas about both essays. The first thing that you're going to do in the audio-video response is to sort of summarize your understanding of both of these essays. I think by and large most people had a very good grip on what Chinua Achebe is arguing, and part of that is because his language is much more direct, much more forceful, and much more sort of driven by a sense of rhetorical purpose. He wants us to think about not just the racism of the text, but also to inquire of ourselves why this text is so central to Western culture. And I think people generally have a good grasp of that. Regarding Said, though, I think in a lot of cases there were some misunderstandings about what exactly he's arguing. So in a lot of cases, people were saying that he is maybe excusing what they see as the racism of the text, or overlooking that, or saying that it's less important than it is for Achebe. And some people attributed this to Said maybe not having experienced colonialism in the same way as Achebe had. This is a slightly problematic argument for two reasons. The first one is that he isn't really excusing the racism of the text. On the contrary, he is very much attuned to its rootedness in assumptions about race that influenced the colonial project. But he is, and the second reason is that he is very much attuned to the experience of colonialism. And in fact, the fact that we're talking about colonialism and imperialism, and the fact that these ideas are so prominent in literary studies, is largely due to Edward Said. And it's worth keeping in mind that Said himself is a Palestinian exile, was a Palestinian exile in America, who had been born in British mandated Palestine. He is very much a product of the world colonial system, rather than being somebody who was outside of it or somebody who's looking at it from the West. But he's also the sort of founding figure of post-colonial theory. So in many ways, the ways that we talk about colonialism are largely sort of produced by Said. So it's worth attending to, well, what exactly is Said's argument here, and it is not that the racism of this doesn't matter. It's that the racism is, in some senses, being sort of framed by the structure of the novel. So I'm not going to go into any more depth on it than that, because that's part of what the assignment is asking you to do, is to sort of explain your understanding of it. But I did want to draw attention to the fact that that in some ways Said's argument here is a lot more subtle and interesting than maybe we're giving it credit for in the Flipgrid discussions. The second thing that you're going to have to do is to take a stand in relation to the text. So obviously you need to express a preference for one or the other. I think in general most people seem to be leaning towards a preference for Achebe. That's understandable. I'm with the people who prefer Said's essay, but it doesn't make a difference. What's most important is that you're able to defend that stance, that you take a clear stance, and that you also provide supporting evidence. And that requires an understanding not just of what the two authors are saying, but also of what makes their approach compelling. So again, coming back to Achebe, it's worth thinking about, well, his sense of rhetorical purpose, and how does that inform the kind of things that he writes about that text. But also, I mean, it's worth attending to, well, what's Said's purpose? What is it that he is trying to uncover or reveal about Heart of Darkness? And it's worth also keeping in mind that in some ways Said is responding directly to Achebe. He is very much conscious of that essay and of what Achebe had to say. I think he respects very highly Achebe's opinion, but he is also offering an alternative perspective. He is sort of challenging him in a lot of ways. You can also interrogate both essays. There's no real need for you to ultimately say that one or the other is correct. It's perfectly possible. I think, for one thing, neither author really addresses the fundamental ambiguity, the sort of the undecidability of the novel to a sufficient degree. I think both authors are, to some extent, boiling it down to its sort of more racist impulses, which it certainly has. But it's also worth thinking about the way that it also encapsulates a lot of kind of counter forces. Those counter forces can include sort of Marlowe's sympathy for the suffering of people in Congo, at times blistering critique of colonialism. And I don't think it's an accident that the novel juxtaposes all of these sort of things. It's actually a very fundamental part of the novel's shape, is that it is not easy to decide its meaning. And any attempt to make very blunt assertions about what that novel is doing or what its significance might be are liable to run into some trouble. So feel free also to refer back to the novel and to consider its complexity when you are evaluating the quality of these two texts, these two essays. I have mentioned also that you don't need to have a script for this. This is a slightly less formal assignment than the other minor assignments, the short papers or the long papers that you've had to do. It's very much asking you to address these texts directly, and so reading directly from a script is not really necessary. In fact, it can make a video less engaging, because in some ways it can become kind of monotonous. If you feel more comfortable with a script, that is absolutely fine. Make sure to practice it a couple of times so that you're kind of comfortable with the camera and comfortable speaking to it. But whatever approach you decide to take, make sure you do have a plan. Make sure you know what points you want to make and in what order you want to make them. And the main thing is to keep the evidence that you want to use close at hand. So that you don't have to quote directly from the texts extensively. You might want to use some key ideas or some key passages that you want to quote from to make particular points about these essays, but you don't have to talk about, like, you don't have to have a whole tranche of quotes. But it is slightly more formal than the Flipgrid, and certainly your assertions about the texts need to be rooted in evidence. So not so much in your feelings about it or your sort of general impressions, but any assertions you make about your opinion on it need to be backed up with some proving evidence. So that remains true from the essays, but there's certainly a lot more scope to be kind of more informal about it. The other things that I wanted to mention, you're not measuring I'm not measuring rather your performance, right? You've watched these videos. I'm nobody to be passing judgment on people's performance. It's not about that. It's more about how effectively can you convey an idea, how effectively can you communicate that. So I mean, speak clearly and speak directly, but it is still more about your ability to organize information and present it effectively. It doesn't matter, for example, if you stumble over a word or two. I do this all the time, so you don't necessarily have to redo the whole thing or start from the beginning.